Sounds,
that should sound better. So
yeah, I definitely wholeheartedly encourage upgrading audio. My mic stand actually recently broke. I have a loose mic now. I'm
oh,
holding it up
nice.
with a giant coffee can.
Oh yeah.
So for listeners, if you want to help me pay for a new mic stand, please visit us at patreon.com/handkerchief dynasty. I think I got a little too enamored with the mic stand though. Like I went to my head a little bit. I was constantly adjusting it, and it was not a high quality mic stand. It was not meant to be adjusted as frequently as I was adjusting it. I think I probably used it as much as it was meant to be used over like 100 years and like 100 days. In any case, welcome one, welcome all. Handkerchief Dynasty, episode 131. We're so pleased to be joined again by media mogul Jason Gregor to talk all things Oilers. How you doing, Jason?
I'm excellent, man. You?
Fantastic. I mean, I'm still high on that game last night. I'm trying to think of a third period that I enjoyed more on like just a spiritual level.
I thought maybe you were telling me that you were delivering some KD to your house. I'm not sure if you saw the story that shocking news that cannabis has been people have been smuggling in KD boxes. So who
Really?
knew? Like there's a stereotype that lives up to it. So I thought when you were high, maybe that's what it was. But no, hey,
Yeah.
the Oilers last night, the third period against Montreal was one of the more dominant periods they played. I really thought Edmonton, despite trailing 1-0, probably deserved a better fate. Like I'm not sure how many times you'll have Connor McDavid on a 2-on-0 and he doesn't get a shot on net. Right? It was kind of weird. And then Montreal, of course, scored a goal. Nice play by Stahl not to kick it. You're allowed to redirect it. But other than that, like think about it. That's 2 games where the team hasn't scored a goal off their stick against Mike Smith, who continues to play well. But really, the last 2 games, the Oilers defensively, I think, have done what Dave Tippett wants them to do. And they've really reduced the quality of high-end chances they're giving up 5-on-5.
In spite of the fact that we still have a lot of youth on the roster, we still have some questions throughout the lineup in terms of long-term answers. Do you feel like this team is really starting to show some maturity?
Well, yeah, because their key guys, really aren't that young. Like Jesse Puljujarvi's come in, he gets to play with the best player in the world. So his responsibility, and he was on a Finnish podcast where he just said, "Hey, I feel like I score when I give the puck to McDavid," right? And so he's got 11 goals himself, which in a full season that'd be a 20-goal guy, which is fine. And Puljujarvi's doing this despite having. I'm sorry, but it's one of the worst sticks in the NHL. And it's a small adjustment. Don't get me wrong, but you watch Jesse Puljujarvi, like he can shoot the puck on the fly. He might be one of the Oilers' better shooters in motion on their entire team, but his stick handling skills and how often he sometimes just, looks like the puck has got chips on it when it's done. You wait, I think this offseason, I won't be surprised if Jesse Puljujarvi's a 28 to 32 goal scorer next year because he's an incredibly diligent worker. He's always put in the work. And I think the Oilers skills coach will sit down with him and say, "Kid, you know what? We got to adjust your stick." And it's going to be a small adjustment. It's not like you're talking 6 inches cut off. Like it might be an inch here. I think they're going to change his lie. And you watch, he'll just have some puck handling skills and watch how much better he'll be because his work ethic and his size and his skill, like he's starting to become the player many hoped he would be when he was drafted. It just shows you that guys need time to mature.
Yeah, it reminds me of when Horkoff went down to like the factory where they made his stick one off season to like get his stick adjusted a certain way. I mean, yeah, I think the potential for growth is still really there. And I also just love the joie de vivre he brings to the team. But sticking on Puljujarvi for a second, what do you think of that newly minted line that we saw late in the game of Connie with Archibald and Puljujarvi?
Well, we've seen Archibald before with McDavid, right? So he can fit in. Josh Archibald's really kind of the Swiss Army knife on the Edmonton Oilers. He doesn't really change his game. He's not going to produce a ton of points when he plays in the top line, but he can be an effective player. He can play his off wing quite comfortably. He's reliable defensively. Is that going to be a for sure line in the playoffs? I'm still not sold on that yet. I think there's injuries. Obviously, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, who did skate today, but I'll be surprised if he plays tomorrow. When you could have an extra 5 days rest, why wouldn't you wait till next Monday to play him?
Absolutely.
So I could see Archibald playing. I think they'll play tomorrow for sure together, and then you'll have the Draisaitl, Yamamoto, Cahoon line most likely, and they'll just bring in another forward, and then you'll have a Haas and Shore as your third and fourth line centers So I don't mind the Archibald line, but I don't think that it's set in stone at all. And I wouldn't be surprised if Josh Archibald ends up in more of a like a checking reliable role in the playoffs.
Yeah. And there's a lot of kind of factors right now undetermined. I mean, we're curious if we're going to see James Neal coming back. Obviously, we had a very significant call up. I mean, I would say probably one of the most significant call ups of the year with Ryan McLeod being recalled. Ryan McLeod of the Clan McLeod. I'm pretty sure he's involved in the Highlander saga in some way. He exists in that world. Now, for Oilers fans that maybe haven't seen him play this year, or maybe are not aware of kind of his current level of play, and because he's really been kicking ass in the AHL, can you speak to what people could expect from him, just like writ large?
Yeah, well, I watched about 4 or 5 games online, and granted, when you watch a game online, it's zoomed in even more than it is on a camera angle on TV, so you don't always get everything. But I've had conversations with Jay Woodcroft on the air and then off the air, and he really feels that the thing that's impressed him most about McLeod this year is his defensive game was always fine, which is kind of rare for a young prospect. Usually it's the other way. You start with the offense and then you got to add the defense. Yep. They really wanted him to become more of an assertive offensive player. And that's really what he's done this year. Now, he's got a ton of power play time and, he's playing first line minutes, but he's also still a penalty killer. So he's getting to play in all situations, which is what you want for your top prospects. That's what the American League is for. And McLeod's big. He's 6'2". He's over 200 pounds. He skates really well. I think he'll be a good addition to your team. And I'm curious. I think that you look at, especially with the Jujhar Khaira, injury last night. And I think that's his second one now where he had his bell rung in a few weeks. So he's probably going to, get extra time off this one. He said the last one, he felt fine, like later on, but last night to me, it looked a little bit worse. So
it was pretty horrible to see. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because it wasn't a dirty hit. It just shows you that you don't have to get hit in the head to get concussed, right? It's just the jarring of the neck. But I look at McLeod. Oiler fans are going to like his speed. They're going to like his size. He's worked on becoming a better forechecker. And the big thing is that he wanted to work on was they wanted to see how he was when the game was stationary. Battles in front of your net, battles in the corner, battles in the opposition's front of the net. And that's like most young players. That's where he's improved. So, and I do believe that Dave Tippett, you're not going to see him come up and play Ryan McLeod 8 minutes a night. I think Ryan McLeod, especially now with Khaira out, he'll get an opportunity. And I wouldn't be stunned, people, if you see McLeod get a look in one of those games, potentially in like a top 6 role. And I know this sounds crazy to some people, but I could see him centering Yamamoto and Nugent Hopkins when he returns. Like I wouldn't, that wouldn't stun me per se at all. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think they want to put him in that situation. But I definitely think, a worst case scenario, he'll be playing kind of like third line minutes. I felt had Khaira stayed healthy, I think Gaetan Haas was the one who was going to come out for McLeod.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it makes me think of things Ken Holland has talked a lot about since he came here, which is, matriculating players in the middle of the year or closer to this time of year. You see them play against a much higher level of competition than if you see them play in training camp and in the early stages of the season. And I'm going to be really, really curious. Like seeing that call up, I got to be honest, even though, I want to temper my expectations and not expect too much, I'm pretty effing excited about Ryan McLeod.
Yeah, and I think it's smart to have realistic expectations. Be excited because the Oilers are going to need some young guys coming up the next few years on entry-level contracts, right? Like you can't expect to always find great bargain deals in free agency. Ken Holland's done a pretty good job overall. Like if you look at, I know that Kyle Turris hasn't worked out, but worst case scenario, he's $575,000 when he's in the minors next year, right? Like it's not killing you. And could Cassian's contract mean a little shorter? For sure. But when you look at like Tyson Barrie's been a home run for 1 year, right? Mm-hmm. We'll see. Is it worth re-signing him when you've got a young Evan Bouchard who they want to make room for in the third pair next year to start? Yeah. So probably not, right? I understand it. Maybe they'll look at it but if Barrie was willing to sign for $4 million, you might consider it. So
yeah, I've heard rumblings that at least it's been put out there that Holland is definitely willing to walk on both Nuge and Barrie this offseason if the price is too high, which just stands to reason, right? I mean, there's a limit to everything, right? Even
there totally is. And I like, Oiler fans have gotten beaten down for a long time, right? The decade of darkness was extended. It was pretty brutal. And then it got extended into 2018 and 2019, right? It had like
Yep.
a window of opportunity. We're like, hey, the playoffs are back. And then it just crushed you, kicked you right in the nuts for 2 years. But the Oilers, they were a good team last year. They're a good team again this year. But they've taken the steps to get here now. The next step is going to be the hardest for the GM, because now you've got to fill out your roster to become a cup contender. I think the Oilers are a contender. I don't think they're a cup contender yet. And that last step is the hardest step to make, right? It's like anybody who, let's say you're a golfer, right? You started out as an 18 and you've worked your way down and now you're a 10. Well, to try to go from a 10 to a 5, or even a 5, if you're a 5 to a scratch golfer, well, that's even harder. And so that's where the Oilers are going to enter. I think because you have the best player in the world in McDavid, and you got one of the best players in Draisaitl, you've got a lot of things built in the right foundation for you. And they've got young guys in key positions coming forward, which is nice. They've got size on the blue line coming, but you can't have all youth, right? We've seen that in Edmonton. And it's the one thing I still caution people. They're like, well, just bring in Lavoie and bring in Holloway and bring in McLeod. Well, you can bring them in over the course of the next few years, not all at once with Samorikov and Broberg and Bouchard. You're going to get crushed because winning teams don't have a massive influx of youth. They might have 1 or 2 guys, but look at Tampa Bay when they won the Stanley Cup last year. Who are the rookies? Now, they had guys on entry-level deals in the final year of Sergachev and Cernak, but they also had Victor Hedman and Ryan McDonough, right? So you look at where the Oilers are going to go now. I think they're just starting to enter their period where they should be a cup contender for the next 4 or 5 years. And this is where Ken Holland's going to have to make his money.
Another young player that I've heard you discuss, and also definitely one of my favorite prospects to follow. I think he's probably looking at a full year in the AHL next year. I would put him, it's probably McLeod, Holloway, top 2 forward prospects in my ranking, followed by a young man by the name of Raphael Lavoie. Are you as excited as I am about this kid, given his unique set of talents and traits? Well,
I go back to watching Lavoie at the Memorial Cup. And when my nephew was a member of the Prince Albert Raiders before he joined the Sharks. And, I talked to Noah about Lavoie, and he was a young kid at the time, and he was one of the big power forwards in Halifax. And he said, man, the kid's competitive. And I always like talking to players because they see things like you can talk about, he's got a good shot. But really, you've got to have a competitive fire to be an NHL player, right? And I know that competitiveness in just the small details, and Lavoie's a big kid. He skates well. He's a young, gangly guy. And I like, Isaac, what you said. I believe that he needs this summer to train like a pro. And that doesn't mean that he hasn't, I remember Ethan Bear and Caleb Jones and many others talked about how they worked out hard in junior, and they did. But to work out like a pro is just a different level, and you've got to elevate yourself. And that's what Lavoie is going to do. He's a big gangly guy who will just need to add some strength to really move his body around. Look at Jesse Puljujärvi. Look at how many times has Puljujärvi fell down this year in a battle. Not very many. Remember his first few years in the league, he looked like Bambi just because he didn't have the strength to move his massive frame around, right? He couldn't balance and control it. Now, you know what? He reverse hits guys. He's 22. He's still not filled out. The guy's going to be a beast when he's 24 or 5. But I look at Lavoie, and he's got a shot. He's got good instincts around. And the thing that I've liked is he went to Europe, he succeeded. He comes back to the American League, he's having instant success. He's showing he can adapt his game, but the NHL is a different level for him. And I think Lavoie will come to camp. He'll tease people in training camp, and there'll be some people, I like him. But I think then he's going to go to the American League, and he'll develop his game, and he's going to become a player who next season, when you're back to normalcy, where you can have your young guys in the minors, unlike Bouchard this year, and you can recall them at the drop of a hat, call them up on a Friday morning, they can play Friday night. That'll benefit guys like that. But I like Lavoie a lot for sure. Right now, I have him as the third best prospect amongst forwards. Now there's Tyler Benson's probably more NHL ready. But I think that Lavoie has a higher upside as an NHL player.
Yeah, I agree. Speaking of, not just expecting to be able to field a bunch of rookies every year, and not just, obviously you want to build through the draft and develop and all that, but I think you do need to matriculate these guys at the right pace. Let me throw a hypothetical at you, even though it's a little unfair. Let's say I've heard Dmitry Kulikov compared to this year's Adam Larson, Russian Adam Larson, I've heard him called. Let's say that's the player we get over the playoffs. He's about the same type of player as our own Adam Larson. Would you like to see the Oilers try and re-sign a player like that and maybe just really force some of the prospects on the back end to really blow the doors off?
It's a good question. If Kulikov's willing to sign a 1-year contract, for sure. But I don't want to lock in on a guy like that who's probably going to cost you, I don't know, 2.5 to 3.5 million. Now, maybe not, because he only costs 1.25. So I guess like you have Chris Russell for 1 more year, right? Like there's your veteran left defender. Now he can play both sides. But if you still have Caleb Jones and you have Darnell Nurse and you've got Russell, you know, do you need Kulikov? Like I think Broberg is going to start in the American League next year. Right. I think the youth on the Oilers blue line will come in the form of Evan Bouchard on the right side. And again, you can't have too much youth at one time if you want to be successfully competitive in the playoffs. So I want to see Kulikov first. Let's see how he fits in and, you know, what gels. And then you also, I guess I forgot William Lagesson, although I don't think William Lagesson he might be a third pair defenseman. I'm not sure he skates well enough. Maybe he can improve that in the offseason. We'll see. But you know, if the Oilers re-sign Larson, do you need Kulikov? Right? Like it doesn't hurt, because the Oilers, the one thing they're going to need, like I think like Bouchard comes in, and there's a few things. He's not going to be he won't have the veteran savvy of a Tyson Barrie right away. You don't snap your fingers and get it. Go back and look at Tyson Barrie's first few years. He wasn't the Tyson Barrie of the last 5 years in his first few years. But Evan Bouchard is 6'3". Tyson Barrie was never 6'3". So Evan Bouchard automatically is just going to cover more space, right? His limbs are in the way more. So automatically, I think he'll be, because he's not a great defender, just like Barrie is, but I think Bouchard will have the potential to become a better defender because he's 6'3". And so if you bring him in, then you could have Kulikov. And if you don't re-sign Larson, you know, then the Oilers look and say, well, what if we don't re-sign Larson for whatever reason? And they're like, well, geez, what if we ran Barrie, Bouchard, and Bear on our right side? Then you'd need 3 pretty big lefties, because, you know, like a guy like Kulikov and a guy like Nurse to play with Barrie and Bear. So then I think it's something to consider, but I wouldn't look at it right now.
Okay. Are you as impressed with me as I am at how, speaking of maturity, how much more mature Evan Bouchard looks right now than he has in the last few years? Like, to me, he just seems like a man now. It's like he seems like he's been playing in the NHL for a couple of years to me, just in terms of his demeanor and his confidence and his calmness. I mean, I know I'm maybe reading a lot into just his jib in interviews and whatnot, but I mean, I think he's probably over ready. I know a lot of people are really frustrated with him not getting into games this year, but is there something to be said for ensuring that your prospects are potentially over ready when it's time for them to finally come in?
Well, the question comes down to, who are you going to take out? Like, you can say Evan Bouchard's ready, but Tyson Barrie is one of the top elite scoring offensive defensemen in the game right now. Yeah. So are you going to, and when Bouchard was in, then Bear came back off of his concussion, and you're like, well, Ethan Bear was really good for us last year. Are we just going to throw him to the trash to keep Evan Bouchard, it wasn't like Evan Bouchard was killing it, right? And I think that's what people have to remember. Evan Bouchard had played okay, but you look at Evan Bouchard's games, and I know people like it. Well, the Oilers were 9-3 with him in the lineup. And I'm like, okay. Are we going to go through every bit player's record and claim that suddenly they're the main reason why they were 9-3? Like, I think that's a little bit of an unfair stat to say that Evan Bouchard was the reason they were 9-3. So, you know, I look, and I like Evan Bouchard a lot, but I have to look at the whole picture this year and say, okay, in a normal year, the minute Ethan Bear came back healthy, Evan Bouchard would have went to the minors, because he could play games. And then if they needed him the next week, you could recall him. The reason they don't send him down this year, A, it used to be a 2-week quarantine. B, had the Oilers had one injury on the right side and he was in the minors, well, now they would have had to play a lefty for 2 full weeks on that side. And everybody knows Chris Russell's better as a left defenseman. Caleb Jones is better as a left defenseman. So you're now going to put guys in a lesser position to succeed. So and I think that, honestly, like, remember his, I think it was Bear's second or third game back, and Tyson Barrie got injured Now it turned out to not to be serious,
Mhm.
but you're thinking, oh geez, now Tyson Berry's down. So that's why they had Bouchard. Now,
Yeah.
now that it's changed to a week quarantine, and now like I believe honestly, Kulikov will be activated. He'll be able to skate with the team on Thursday. Now I'm not sure the Oilers will practice on Thursday, probably have a day off, but he'll skate. And then I could see Evan Bouchard going down to the minors on Thursday because now the Oilers have 8 defensemen, right? And I know that Lagesson and Kulikov are both lefties, so it's not ideal. But then worst case scenario is if you get an injury to one of your righties, you can recall Bouchard. He'll have gotten some games in because he hasn't played since March 1st, so that will help. And B, you could slide over a guy for 1 or 2 games or 3 at the most that Bouchard would not be available while he's quarantining, and then you bring him back. So when I look at the whole big picture of Evan Bouchard's development, and he got to play in Sweden where a lot of guys weren't playing in the first half of the year. Then he got into 12 NHL games this season. He's got to practice on the taxi squad, and we've seen guys come off the taxi squad and be NHL ready and be big contributors. So I think it's okay. And now with the Kulikov addition, I think you will see Bouchard go down. If he doesn't go down on Thursday or Friday, that's when I think it's very fair to say, hey, what's going on? Why do you have 9 defensemen? You don't need 9. You can send him down to at least play some games. Because if you do get a right shot injury and you want him to play, do you want him to be sitting out from March 1st until May 15th? I don't think so.
Mike Smith, obviously, as mentioned and as off commented by many people, is having a hell of a season. I think it's pretty much a slam dunk at this point for Kenny to try and get him re-signed for next year. But what number do you think we get him re-signed for? Is it just performance bonus laden? I mean, are we getting him under for $2 million next year?
Well, his base is 1.5 this year, and then he has 500 grand in bonuses that he'll reach 375 of that in the regular season because he'll play 30 games. I don't think he's going to get to 40, obviously not. So, so there he'll basically be 1.875, and maybe he gets the other $125,000 bonus if they win around in the playoffs or he plays enough games. Probably does. So Mike Smith, it's funny. The Oilers were in, they didn't hide it. They were in on Markstrom. At the end of the day, they didn't match the contract that Calgary did. And for 1 year, that's looked like an unbelievable move. Right. But as we all know, like now let's see what happens next year and the year after. Like, do they have other goaltenders? Like Mikko Koskinen can be a good backup. He's proven that he can't carry the load as a proven starter. Yeah. So you could like Mike Smith's going to be a fascinating case study for the Edmonton Oilers because, you look at the free agent market, there are some other goalies out there. And I think Ken Holland probably owes it to his organization to say, okay, if I can get this guy locked up for 3 years, I probably got to do it over locking up a 40-year-old for 1 year. And so Mike Smith probably becomes kind of your backup plan, unless, because I would expect the Oilers to expose Koskinen in the expansion draft. Now, I highly doubt Seattle takes him. I highly doubt it. But what if they do? Like maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm missing something in the expansion draft and they take him. Well, then it's a no-brainer. You re-sign Smith, and then you can go out and get your other netminder. But as great of a season as Mike Smith has had, the number one rule of a GM is to try to remove the emotion from your signings. It's hard. And I think that because, they look at, man, Mike Smith's been so great for us, but A, we have to see what the playoffs hold, whether that's fair or not. That's going to play a big part in it. But B, sure. I think they're going to look and say, okay, who's available, right? And then it comes down to cost, because if, let's say, you could land Freddie Anderson for 3 years, but with his injury history and probably wanting 5.5, is that something you want to do, right? They're going to have to weigh a lot of things, but I think having Mike Smith there, and I think Ken Holland is, no one else is going to get his rights before free agency and whatever that is this year, July 29th. I think I can't remember the date, 26th, whatever it is.
Something like that. Yeah.
So they'll have time to look at that one, but I don't think it's a slam dunk for sure that they re-sign him. It's one that they're going to have to kind of weigh the options and see who the other goalies are that are available. And it might come down to saying, hey, Mike, I know that this isn't a slap in the face. This is just pure business. And you're a 40-year-old goalie and we think you're good, but if we could get a 29-year-old goalie for 3 years, we probably have to do that.
There's a pretty high probability of Mikko Koskinen getting bought out this summer. I mean, in spite of the fact that he's a decent. No, you don't think so? No way.
But name a championship team, Isaac, that had dead money cap space.
Not a lot. Not many that I can think of.
So like Mikko Koskinen has 1 year left. I know you can buy him out and that's the short. It's like people who say buy out James Neal. I get that you save money on James Neal early, but then you have now 4 extra years of James Neal that's $2 million. Look at Blake Coleman and Barclay Goodrow. If you have $2 million in dead cap space, you can't add either one of those guys at the deadline. Right. And Blake Coleman had 13 points for you to help you win a Stanley Cup. He wasn't your main guy, but that's a good contributing player. And so, no, I don't see buyouts in the future. I would hope not, because I have studied it and I have researched it, and dead cap space is like a detriment to it, because usually if you're a top contending team, you're maximizing your cap space, and that's not that's a short-term thinking that doesn't produce long-term success.
Fair enough. So you expect him back next year, or you expect him to be? I mean, you said like Seattle, or maybe a trade. Like, could we?
Like if you could trade Koskinen and you have to eat half his salary for the year, well, that's a better option, because at least it's not past. Now you still have your full salary cap in a flat cap world in 22, 23, rather than, I don't even know what Koskinen is buyout. You're talking, it's $4.5 million that he's owned. And, so you buy him out at 3 million. So that's 1.5 over 2. Well, that's still 1.5 million, right? Like that's Josh Archibald's contract. I'd rather have Josh Archibald than not have a Josh Archibald type, because I got a guy sitting, like, the Oilers are just getting out of their cap hell, right? Like Pouliot, 1.3 million comes off the books. Another million from Sekera. It goes down from 2.5 to 1.5. So there's $2.3 million that the Oilers simply did not have this year.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's a massive advantage. Plus, 2.1 million from Chason. He's not going to get that. So, there's $4.4 million right there.
Do you think we'll be surprised how much turnover we see this offseason potentially?
It's a good question. I think there's going to be more, because like where the challenge comes in is you have a defenseman who's played 20 minutes a night. You've got another defenseman who's played like 19, and you got a forward who's playing 19 minutes. They're all UFAs. Now, I think the Oilers, I see 2 of them coming back. In the perfect situation, it's Nugent Hopkins and Larson, based on your skill set and the makeup of your team. But it might not be that, right? And I don't think you can lose all 3 of them, because it's hard. Like, there are some left wingers in free agency. Like, I look at Zach Hyman in Toronto, and I look at the Leafs payroll. Now, Willie Nylander being late for a team practice and making, he's a good player, but they might say, geez, if we could trade Nylander to keep Hyman, we would do it, right? But like Zach Hyman, is he willing to take a little bit of a pay cut in Toronto, or would he take, like, I think he can get $4 million. Like, some people have said 6. I think that's ridiculous. He might even get 5, right? Yeah. But for what Zach Hyman does, and it's the term, Isaac, I have hammered on this for years. This summer for Ken Holland, you can live with overpaying a guy for a shorter period of time than giving a guy term and having a slightly less. Because when you give term to say, oh, instead of being 6 mil, it's 5.5, yippee shit. Now it's 5.5 for an extra year when the guy's not going to be good. And that's not good business.
Do you think there's any truth to the kind of rumblings that for some of these contracts, like say for a Markstrom, I heard this last year, that the kind of implicit understanding was that you're going to be buying that player out in the last year or two. And so you kind of factor that into your kind of napkin calculation. Do you think there's GMs that are doing that out there just to land those free agents?
There might be some, but like, if you're doing that and you're Calgary, I guess you had a belief system, and I'm not sure that's true or not. I think when you sign the contract and like a 6-year deal, my goodness, you would hope that you're going to get pretty good bang for your buck for the 6. Like, if you're only saying, hey, we're signing him for 6, but we're going to, after year 4, we'll just buy him out. I'm like, oof, like that. To me, that, like, you got to have real deep pockets, but again, now you're just wasting cap space. Like a buyout of Markstrom for 2 years, you're buying out 12 million, right? You're 8 million. You got to spread out over 4 years, right? There's $2 million and he's just doing nothing. So like, look at Kyle Turris, right? Look at Nashville. What happened there, right? So I've said this for years. The NHLPA and the NHL should have a maximum of 5-year term for anybody who starts their 3rd contract. So you can still give the 2nd contract of 8 years for the McDavids and the Dreisaitl's and the elite players that you want. But once you get to your 3rd contract, it's max 5 years. And the reason is you're going to have less buyouts. So you're going to have less dead cap space, and you're going to, and the current PA players are going to be getting actually more money of the actual cap rather than having alumni who are retired, who are being bought out, taking some of that money.
I
Right.
like
So
it.
they'll
That's a
get their
great
money
idea.
over 3 years, not over 5. And hey, sorry, like you shouldn't be functioning as a business that says, hey, we just buy out our mistakes, because eventually that catches up to you. And we saw that with the Oilers, right? They bought out Sekera, and I get why they did it. And they did it at the time because they weren't going to be that competitive. I know that, Oilers fans didn't want to hear, but it's true. When you bought out Sekera, you were basically admitting you knew you weren't 3 years away. Now they've got what, after this year, 1 year left of Sekera. Right. And
Something
it's
like that.
only
Yeah.
1.5, but it's still 1.5. Like, that's still a lot of dead cap space.
It's even more right now in the pandemic era, right? Because you're seeing so
100%.
many more players on just league minimum contracts. Let me also just sticking on Calgary just for one more quick second, though. Like, we saw them go on a nice little, I think it was a 3-game winning streak once they were running on 100% pure Daryl Sutter, which we all know is one of the most potent coaching substances known to man. But obviously kind of stuck in the mud right now. Do you see them being a team of note at all in the next year or two, or do you think they're going to be wandering in the desert a little bit longer now?
Well, I think Jacob Markstrom's a good goaltender, and I think he can play better. When you have a good goalie, you can stay in the hunt. There's no question. But there's going to need to be a reshuffling in Calgary. The problem is you keep hearing the names of Johnny Gaudreau. Okay, well, you trade Johnny Gaudreau. It's very rare that we have a Hossa for a Heatley type trade. So usually if you're trading Johnny Gaudreau, you're probably getting 2 players that you hope might be better. And maybe sometimes that works out. But for a team that's not overly gifted offensively to begin with, now you're going to get rid of one of your best offensive players. To me, you've downgraded your skill. And it's hard to look at the Edmonton Oilers when they traded Taylor Hall. And they had McDavid and Draisaitl, and they still have big holes offensively in their depth, right? So if the Flames trade Gaudreau, they don't have a McDavid or a Draisaitl. It's not like Sean Monahan. Like, Sean Monahan's a good goal scorer, but he's not a 100-point player. He's not an 80-point player, right? Yeah. So I'm fascinated to see what happens in Calgary this offseason from their management right on down. Is Treliving stay on? Are they making a big change? Their defense core, Giordano. Now they got, I like Rasmus Anderson and Hanifin, and they got good guys. Tanev's come in. He's played pretty well.
That's
for
true.
them. But I see Calgary. When I look next year and then we go back to the regular Pacific Division, I see Vegas and Edmonton. And then there's a pretty big gap to the next team. It might be Calgary. Calgary could be third because San Jose, Anaheim, LA, Seattle, and Vancouver, like Vancouver, if they're healthy, maybe they could be the third team. But I think right now you would say there's probably going to be a gap between 1 and 2 to 3 and 4 in the Pacific.
And then looking at the 4, it looks like we have our 4 playoff teams established here in the Northern Abstraction. I'm gonna miss this division. This has been kind of a fun division to follow this year. And we'll start the wind down procedure. But let me just ask you, especially after this game against Montreal, looking at our recent play against Winnipeg, and also seeing some of the issues that are cropping up in Toronto. Are you really afraid of any one of these 3 teams in the first round, or do you think if the Oilers come in and play their own game and are able to kind of cobble together some lines that are going in the next few weeks here, that we really got a great chance against all 3?
Well, I said at the start of the year, I picked the Oilers to be a clear playoff team. I actually picked them to finish first, which I've never done in 20 years. Because that was being pretty easy. They've never been close. And, they still have an outside chance at that. We'll see. Probably, it's hard to catch Toronto, but, if they win their game in hand, then they're only 3 back. So we'll see. But the Oilers, my fear at the start of the year was that come playoff time, they don't have a ton of size in the back end, which is why the Kulikov addition made sense.
Yep.
And they had a lot of smaller, similar forwards. And if Jujhar Khaira is out for the postseason, that's a big blow, because I felt if you could have Khaira and McLeod and Draisaitl and McDavid down the middle, now you got some good size down the middle. And, you can get by. Like, Yamamoto can play my team all day long, but I can't have Yamamoto and Ennis and Cahoon and Turris. Now, Turris and Ennis probably aren't going to play. So, or Nygaard, right? So, Edmonton, I'm not scared of any of those teams if I was the Edmonton Oilers, but I don't see Oilers, like, there's no clear favorite to me. I think they're all competitive. I think, like, every team has their weakness. Right now, Toronto's question marks their goaltending, right? Because I think Jack Campbell's a good goalie. I'm taking Mike Smith. I'm taking Hellebuck. I'm taking Price or Allen ahead of him. So, there's the concern in Toronto. Obviously, Montreal's concern is they don't have the offensive firepower to match the other three teams in the North. They just don't. Winnipeg's defense core is a concern. And to me, Edmonton's size, which is a direct correlation to me to their struggles, the goals against 5-on-5. Their overall team goals against is very good because their special teams is good. But their 5-on-5 play is still a little bit of a concern. It's been good for 2 games. But as we all know, the playoffs are a different beast. And what impressed me about the Oilers game against Montreal on Monday was that was a physical game, probably the most chippy physical game I'd seen in months.
Yeah.
And they didn't back down, which is good. So I think, I do believe home ice, even with no fans, still matters. And that's going to be the key for Edmonton is to try to finish at bare minimum second place to get home ice for that first round. Montreal, I still see them as I'd rather face Montreal than Toronto or Winnipeg in the first round.
Yeah, I agree. Especially after this last game. I mean, it seemed like they kind of had, we were just waiting to break through, although you really saw them pushing and pushing and pushing. It just seemed like a matter of time. I think with this game against Montreal in the rearview mirror, I mean, really, it comes down to, do you think the Oilers and Tippett and the other coaching staff can kind of solve a team in a 7-game series? And my confidence in the ability of our top players to do that is actually pretty high.
Yeah, well, I think Edmonton, getting kicked in the nuts like they did last year against Chicago, that's a learning experience that can really benefit you. It's painful at the time and it's disappointing for a fan base, but you go back to the 82 Oilers, you go to the 2019 Lightning, the 2006 Detroit Red Wings. They're and the Oilers weren't good as them, right? Those were all elite teams that had 30, 40 more points in the team they faced and they still lost. So, what happens is the Oilers' best players have all come out and been even better this year. McDavid's better. Draisaitl's better. Darnell Nurse is better. And so, as much as you need depth, you still need your big guys to go. And Ethan Bear talked about it. I asked him, and even McDavid, when I asked him about their celebration on the Ethan Bear goal, you saw Ethan Bear, it was his first goal of the year. And he admitted, man, he hadn't had that feeling. He missed skating back to the bench and having all the guys smiling at you.
It's a beautiful moment.
It's funny. That sounds, because hockey really at the genesis is still, the kid inside of us. And that response was the kid inside of you. Who doesn't love seeing their buddies all smiling, because you did something, because you're just as happy when they score and you like that everybody's happy for you. But you saw the reaction, not just him, the whole 5 guys, they celebrated, very outwardly for a good 4 or 5 seconds. And McDavid said it was just kind of like a release of frustration. God, this team, we couldn't score. And then the floodgates opened. And I'm curious to see if that continues on Wednesday. That just becomes a mindset. And all of a sudden it's we can score against these guys, right? So you get over your own emotional or mental hurdle. And I don't think Montreal, their defense is clearly the strength of their team. Man, they're big and they're mobile and so it'll be a challenge, but I don't think Montreal has the offensive power of McDavid can do nothing. I shouldn't say do nothing. He can be held off the score sheet for 40 minutes and then score 2 or 3 points in 10 minutes. Well, Montreal just doesn't have that. And then you throw out Draisaitl and he's capable of doing that. So I still think that's the wild card, because Scheifele and Connor and Ehlers can do that in Winnipeg. And obviously Matthews and Marner can do that in Toronto. And I still when you look at Stanley Cup winners, name one that won without a number 1 center. And I don't believe that Montreal has a legit number 1 center, right? They've got Danault's, he's an excellent number 3. Maybe he's a low end number 2 because he's so good defensively. But Kotkaniemi, Suzuki, they're not number 1s, right? Eric Stahl's not a number 1. So I think that's their big detriment.
Fantastic stuff, Jason. Always great to have you on the pod. I'm sure everyone's going to love listening. I'm going to probably publish this in the next 10, 20 minutes here. Anything you want to, I'll give you the last parting shot, parting words, anything you're following? I think you started a podcast recently, as well as obviously your fantastic radio show, right?
Yeah, Frank Saravalli and myself from we've got the DFO rundown on dailyfaceoff.com, and it drops on Mondays and Fridays. We actually just had Chris Beaudry, who was the assistant coach of Humboldt, and he wasn't on the bus, and which was a normal routine for him because of where his farm was located. But he talked about the mental health struggles of getting over that. And man, he went into the things that he had to do in the days after the bus crash, identify the players, and he couldn't identify some of them because a lot of them had blonde dyed hair, and they're all 6 feet tall or 6'2", and it was he was really good. And if anybody's dealing with, mental health challenges during this pandemic, and he just had some really positive, upbeat advice. Like most people obviously don't have the same path as he had because of that, but he's a recovering alcoholic, which had happened prior. And so I would recommend that if you want to go to the dailyfaceoff.com, check out the rundown. Chris Beaudry is fantastic guest. We kind of go into deep dives like that on that pod.
Sounds fantastic. Yeah, I've heard a few clips, but I'm definitely going to be checking more of it out. And Frank's also great. So just you're the hardest working man in show business, though, Jason. You've got what, like, so I see you on. It's always great when you're on Low Tide in the morning too. By the way,
that's it. Yeah, once a week, LT and I do each other's show. But there's like Monday was a busy day for me because I record the podcast in the morning. Then I have to write 2 articles for Oilers Nation. Then I host my 4-hour show. So then I go to the game. But you know what? I'm lucky. I love my job. Like I really do. I got a farm boy's work ethic, I think. So that helps me. But it's like my wife she says like you just love digging up stats and researching. Like I really do. And it's stuff that I'm passionate about. So it's, I'm lucky. It's fun. I'm able to do what I want. I always tell people if you find the job you love, it doesn't really feel like work.
Yeah, it really shows. And the TSN show has been really fantastic. They wanted to compliment you on that. I think it's really gotten stronger and stronger just in the last while here, although it's always been really good. So thank you so much for your time. We'll hook it up again real soon. I'll pass on your regrets to the High Priest of Oilers Magic. He doesn't believe that the guests are always disappointed when he's not able to make it.
Yeah, well, I can't believe he's not here. Like,
I know.
Where was he? Was he outside at Graceland trying to tell him that, the High Priest says this is not a good thing? Maybe just take some time off. What was he doing?
Exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. You hit the nail on the head. Okay, Jason, have a great day. We'll talk real soon and enjoy the next game.
Yeah, you too, Isaac. Have a good one.
Take care.